As the first primaries are next month, I will be making videos discussing the top 4 candidates, 3 of whom I will not be voting for in the primary unless my choice is dropped out by May, but also why I will vote for these people in the general because they are still better than Trump. This week we have Uncle Joe Biden. Here are the top 10 reasons why I will not be voting for Joe Biden in the primary, but will happily vote for him in the general election. Number 10, he voted against ending the Electoral College. In the early 70s, Birch Bayh, senator from Indiana, put forth a constitutional amendment to switch the Electoral College to the popular vote. The Southern conservatives were having none of that because they were worried it would prevent the South from electing a candidate. There were filibusters and it never was even able to make it to a vote. 8 years later, the Southern conservatives weren't so concerned and the bill made it to the Senate floor. However, Democrats this time were nervous it could hurt their chances of winning, so by a narrow margin they defeated the bill. One of those senators was newly elected freshman from Delaware, Joseph Robinette Biden. Without these Democrats, Trump and George W. Bush would have never been president. That said, that is nowhere near enough to make me not vote for him in the general election. Number 9, he voted for the crime bill. When Joe rambles about his experience with corn pop, he's trying to make a point to show how woke he is to black people's issues. And 10 to 20 years ago, that kind of story actually may have meant something. These days it just sounds disjointed and a bit racist. Joe was woke for his time. Seriously, he went out of his way to learn up close and personal the needs of the black community, something few white people were doing. It's one of the reasons the older black community loves him. Older black people have long been burnt by politicians repeatedly and are super distrusting of them. So unless you have a long resume of accomplishments for them, they are much more likely to support the devil they know than to take a chance on someone they don't. However, his accomplishments have not kept up with the times. In the 90s, he not only voted for the crime bill people hated Hillary for, who couldn't vote for it, he pushed the bill through. Since then, the 3 strikes law has hurt blacks and minorities like crazy, spiking our incarceration rate to much higher than the rest of the world, which motivated the for-profit prison industry in the long term. He also recently said that while we should decriminalize it, we shouldn't legalize weed because it might be a gateway drug, even though we've pretty much established that is only because weed being illegal normalizes criminality for people, and dealers have far worse things to sell besides weed. That said, he actually does care about minorities, even if he's completely out of touch, while Trump has used racist dog whistles repeatedly throughout his presidency. While Biden was learning about the needs of the black community, Trump was being sued for refusing to let black people live in his buildings. Number 8, dealings with women. During the 90s, Clarence Thomas was being appointed to the bench and Anita Hill, one of the clerks, had claimed sexual harassment. Instead of protecting a potential victim, he stuck with the old boys mentality and condescended and belittled her arguments. Thomas got on the bench without a hitch, and now we have probably 2 rapists on the Supreme Court. He also is incredibly handsy with women and sniffs their hair and makes them feel incredibly uncomfortable. But he was so powerful no one could tell him no or stop it until the Me Too movement. I think he's still completely oblivious in his old age just how much of a creepy bastard he was. That said, unlike Trump, Joe hasn't cheated on his wives with porn stars, had allegations of rape or sexual misconduct, or bragged about grabbing anyone's genitals. He was also very pro-LGBT and pushed Obama to have to move probably faster than he wanted to on the issue. Trump pretends to be pro-LGBT, but then promoted nothing but Christian dominionist or flat-out racist judges, along with pushing for religious freedom laws allowing denial of service to LGBT persons. Number 7. Rambling. Biden rambles. He's often not clear or coherent. Many who have loved ones with dementia are also worried he could be showing signs of it, and stress brings it on much faster, and no job in America is more stressful than the presidency. That said, Trump under stress rambles racistly, thinks everything coming out of his mouth is genius, and he can never be wrong, and has the opinion of the last person he talks to, treats his staff like garbage when things go badly for him, and rants about how it takes 10 to 15 times to flush a modern toilet, which will happen if you eat nothing but McDonald's. They can both have problems with the old man yells at clouds level of rambling, but at least Biden isn't cruel in his speeches. He thinks he could be wrong at times, and still makes way more sense. Number 6, he likes big corporations. Of the top candidates, Biden has taken more of his money from big rich donors than any of the candidates. The only one even close to him is Mayor Pete. I judge no one for taking money from big donors on a statewide job. thanks to Citizens United. Without big donors, it's pretty much impossible for down-ticket people to compete with Super PAC money, and we must fix that. Also, I judge no one for doing fundraisers for down-ticket candidates with super rich people. It's actually good as it helps down-ticket candidates win, something we need sorely. It's why when people are calling Warren a hypocrite for calling out Pete for his wine cave because she does them herself, she is doing them for other candidates so they can win down-ticket, not for herself. They have a tiny pool of people, and small donors alone won't elect them. However, if you're running for president, your base is the entire nation. If you can't run your entire campaign on small donations, you don't have a grassroots movement. You have a corporate one, and you probably shouldn't be running to begin with. It means you're artificially propped up by the rich. And while Warren and Bernie did come in from their Senate races with a sizable war chest from big donors, they stopped when they reached the presidential election. They had also built up a nationwide brand already. Biden has the most name recognition and a huge war chest and should easily be able to run a campaign on small donations, but as he still relies on rich donors for his campaign, it means that while he's popular, much of that popularity is artificial and propped up by the rich. That said, Trump just used the tactic of saying the most horrible, insane, and cruel things to get the media to hyperinflate his coverage over the other candidates and relied on Russian influence operations to get elected, and has paid Russia back in kind generously. So in spite of this point, I will still happily vote for Biden in the general. Number 5, stuck in the old Democratic way of doing things and seems to believe Trump is the cause of every problem. Besides his repeated claims that we need a Republican Party, and if the Republican Party crumbles, the Democratic Party will have too much power, believing that the Democratic Party is a lockstep monolith, and factions of opposition won't keep each other in check, while the next party finds its way to reestablish the two-party system. Joe seems to think that this is the only possible way to run a nation, which he also constantly claims that Trump is an anomaly, and if Trump goes away, we will have unity in the nation again. Trump got elected because the GOP has constantly gone out of its way to prevent compromise and unity, and has used partisanship and blatant lies, both-sidism and whataboutism, to get people to the point where they believed all politicians were equally craven and corrupt, and Trump's crimes no longer seemed to be that bad. He wants things to go back to a golden age that never really existed of when he got into politics, and both parties really were kind of on the same side, for the unions at home and the corporations to rig the markets overseas. He has no experience in the real world outside of the Senate, but is for some reason considered the working man of the election. He's running his campaign just like he did every year, and nothing has changed. He would have in many ways been close to a Reagan Republican because the parties back then weren't really that different from each other. That said, if it's a choice between a traitor and the moderate, I'll go for the moderate. Number 4, Burisma. While helping get his son a job on the board of the Ukrainian energy company with mediocre experience at best is not legally corruption or illegal, it's still incredibly stupid. It was nepotism and shady as hell, as it could have been viewed as corruption. The appearance of corruption can sink a candidate much worse than actually being corrupt, because you at least get some perks that can keep you afloat if you do corruption the right way, as you can see with President Trump, who also appoints family members and loyalists to even higher jobs they are completely unqualified for, and all the people mad at Biden don't even blink or think about it for a second if you try to bring that up. Burisma was stupid and shady, but was still way better and legal than anything Trump has ever done. Number 3, he doesn't understand the tech problem. As I've mentioned in a video listed below, he doesn't understand how the election was interfered with, how misinformation is spreading around the net like a virus, how personal data is used, and how most of these big media companies, social media companies, and tech companies are essentially monopolies, and he doesn't have a clue or plan how to fix it. If these problems aren't fixed, even if we get a Democrat in the White House, we will still just get another Trump in 4 to 8 years. That said, Trump has since getting elected paid Russia back in full for their interference and made America Russia's little bitch boy. Anyone, including Joe, would be way better than Trump. Number 2, backed out of his one-term pledge. One of the things he said when he first started running was that he was going to be a one-term president to bring the party together for unity and get rid of Trump. For this reason, he was a few points higher on my list of candidates, as I could live with that a bit more. Then recently, he backed out of that promise, dropping him even further down my list of candidates. That said, Trump has done nothing but break promises to everyone but rich people, and has joked about being president for life, or that he deserves a third term because of the unfair witch hunt. I will be marching to the polls for Biden in the general election if that happens. And number one, he hasn't seemed to learn any lessons from the past. Joe's been criticized for all of these, especially this election, and he has done nothing to apologize for, correct his mistakes, or change anything about him in this election. He has in fact doubled down on it, and people are comparing him to Trump in that way, hoping he will appeal to Republicans who like that about Trump, but are now burnt by him. It is now impossible to teach an old Joe new tricks. That said, at least he's not doing it out of cruelty like Trump, and hasn't committed crimes, gaffes galore and some shady unethical stuff, but not flat out crimes. Once I get over the fact that I didn't get my candidate of choice in this primary, I will happily work next year to get Joe Biden elected president so that Donald Trump is no longer president and can finally get his day in court for his crimes against America and humanity. So thank you so much for joining me on my podcast. I'm sure there was nothing controversial about this, and everyone will happily get along in the comments section, which you can do on the YouTube version of this video, or my Facebook page, After School Democracy. Link in the show notes. Just a reminder that I'm Anubis 2814 on YouTube, and I have over 500 videos on different topics that I've made over the past 10 years. Please subscribe, and if your podcast site has the option, give me a like or review. If you think what I have to say informed you, consider supporting my Patreon. I'll be doing this podcast weekly and try to get it out on the same day, so I hope to see you here next week, ready to be filled with new ideas. Take care. This channel is helped tremendously by the generous supporters on Patreon. A big thank you to the wonderful Joe Taylor, Elias Garcia Guevara, and Ogrel for their support at the $10 a month Wapawet level. Please consider donating to my work if you can, and thank you all for listening.